After the invasion of Poland in 1939, Britain and Germany entered a phase of staring awkwardly at each other across the English Channel. This period, charmingly called the Phony War, was mostly about dropping pamphlets instead of bombs, which must have been a huge relief for German civilians and a minor inconvenience for their street sweepers. Meanwhile, back in Britain, preparations were adorably earnest. The government issued everyone an Anderson shelter, a piece of corrugated iron you were supposed to bury in your garden, assuming you had a garden, and the strength to dig a massive hole. They also handed out gas masks in cardboard boxes with strings, turning an entire generation of children into terrifying little monsters for playtime. Everyone felt vaguely prepared for something, though nobody was quite sure what, creating a nationwide atmosphere of supremely British, organized anxiety.
Before you can indiscriminately bomb a country's cities, there's a certain etiquette to follow. First, you have to at least try to get rid of their air force. This preliminary step was called the Battle of Britain. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, was tasked by its famously modest commander, Hermann Goering, with achieving air superiority. He assured his superiors this would be a simple matter, taking just a few weeks. The Royal Air Force, however, proved to be deeply uncooperative. Thanks to a new invention called radar and a surprisingly effective command and control system under Hugh Dowding, the RAF always seemed to know where the Luftwaffe was going. It was like trying to plan a surprise party for someone who has a copy of the guest list and a live feed of your planning session. After getting their noses bloodied for months, the plan to invade Britain, Operation Sea Lion, was quietly put on a shelf, presumably next to Learn to Swim and Invade Russia in Winter. With the invasion postponed, a new, even more brilliant idea bubbled to the surface in Berlin. What if, instead of fighting soldiers, we just bombed civilians until they got sad and gave up? This wasn't a new concept. It's a theory called strategic bombing, championed by minds like Giulio Douhet, who argued that dropping enough explosives on cities would shatter civilian morale and make a country surrender. It's a recurring theme in human history, the deep-seated belief that if you are horrible enough to ordinary people, they will rise up and overthrow their own government for you. This strategy has a historical success rate of approximately 0%, but it's never stopped anyone from trying. The German leadership theorized that the British, particularly the working-class Londoners, lacked the grit to withstand a sustained bombing campaign. They were about to conduct a massive, unsolicited, and extremely violent sociological experiment to test that hypothesis. Hitting a specific city at night from 20,000 feet in the 1940s was not easy. You couldn't just type "Docks of London" into Google Maps. But the Germans, ever the engineers, had a solution. They developed a series of radio navigation systems that were astonishingly clever. The first was called Knickebein, or crooked leg, which used two radio beams that crossed over the target. The bomber pilot would listen for two different signals in his headphones. When they merged into one continuous tone, he knew he was right on track to drop his presence. When the British figured out how to jam this, a technological feud known as the Battle of the Beams, the Germans just upgraded. They rolled out X-Gert and Y-Gert, more complex systems that offered even greater precision. It was an incredible amount of technical ingenuity, all in the service of finding a hospital or a bakery in the dark and dropping a 1-ton bomb on it. The main event kicked off on September 7, 1940. On that afternoon, nearly 1,000 German aircraft appeared over London. Their primary target was the city's East End, home to the sprawling docks and, conveniently, some of the poorest and most crowded neighborhoods.
For hours, they dropped high explosives and incendiaries, turning warehouses, factories, and entire streets into an inferno. The fires in the Surrey docks were so intense, they created their own weather systems. That night, the bombers returned, guided by the very fires they had started earlier. It was horribly efficient. By the next morning, parts of London were unrecognizable. This day, which came to be known as Black Saturday, marked the shift from targeting military infrastructure to simply targeting London itself. The goal was no longer just to win a war, it was to break a city. As the bombs fell, Londoners had to figure out where to hide. The government, in its wisdom, initially discouraged people from using the deep-level tube stations as shelters. They were worried about disease, sanitation, and something they called shelter mentality, the fear that people would go underground and just refuse to come out. But after a bomb hit a school in the East End being used as a shelter and killed hundreds, people decided to take matters into their own hands. They just started buying tickets and refusing to leave the platforms. It was a quiet, polite, and thoroughly British rebellion. Soon, the government had to accept reality and organize the chaos, setting up bunk beds, first aid posts, and even libraries. Life underground became a strange new normal, with thousands of people creating a subterranean city, a testament to the fact that when official plans fail, human ingenuity and a desperate need not to be blown up will always find a way. While London burned, the Luftwaffe was refining its craft. On the night of November 14, 1940, they decided to test their newest masterpiece of destruction on the city of Coventry. The raid, codenamed Operation Moonlight Sonata, was meticulous. First, bombers dropped high-explosive bombs and air mines to blow the roofs off buildings and shatter water mains, hampering the firefighters. Then came the main wave, dropping thousands of incendiary bombs onto the exposed timber frames of the city's medieval heart. This 1-2 punch was designed to create a firestorm, a blaze so large and intense it consumes all the oxygen and creates its own wind. It worked perfectly. The historic Coventry Cathedral was gutted and the city center was essentially erased from the map. The Germans were so proud of this achievement they coined a new verb, Coventrieren, to coventrate, to annihilate a city. It's always charming when a war crime becomes a marketing term. By 1942, the war had turned, and the RAF was busy returning the favor over German cities. This, of course, did not sit well with the German leadership. In an act of what can only be described as weaponized pettiness, they launched a new series of attacks known as the Baedeker raids. Why Baedeker? Because that was the name of a popular German travel guide to Britain. The targets were chosen not for their military or industrial value, but for their historical and cultural significance. If a city had 3 stars in the Baedeker Guide, it went on the list. Cities like Exeter, Bath, Norwich, and York were hit. The goal was pure retaliation, an attempt to destroy Britain's heritage because Germany's was being destroyed. It's a level of spite usually reserved for bitter divorces, not international warfare. Bombing a 2,000-year-old Roman bathhouse doesn't win you a war, but it does secure your place in the history books as a magnificent jerk. The award for the most destructive single night in London goes to December 29, 1940. This raid had one simple objective:
fire. It was timed for a low tide on the River Thames, making it harder for firefighters to draw water. The Luftwaffe almost exclusively dropped incendiary bombs, tens of thousands of them, on the historic city of London. This square mile of the city was filled with publishing houses, paper warehouses, and ancient churches. Basically, it was a giant tinderbox. The resulting blaze was called the Second Great Fire of London. It was fought not by a professional army, but by the auxiliary fire service, made up of volunteers who were often writers, shopkeepers, and clerks. They fought heroically to save what they could, most famously St. Paul's Cathedral. A photograph of its dome, serene and untouched amidst a sea of fire and smoke, became a global symbol of British defiance. It's a stunning image, proving that sometimes the best propaganda isn't planned, it's just a lucky shot in the middle of hell.
So, after all that fire, destruction, and meticulously engineered terror, did the grand experiment work? Did British morale shatter? The short answer is no. The slightly longer answer is absolutely not, and it actually backfired spectacularly. Instead of turning against their government, most Britons became more determined. Surveys from the time, like those conducted by the Mass Observation Project, found that while people were scared and miserable, they were also furious and unified against the enemy. Bombing a nation's civilians tends to have that effect. It's a fantastic recruitment tool for their army. Furthermore, the actual strategic goal, crippling British industry, also failed. While production dipped during the heaviest raids, it never stopped. In fact, for many key war materials, production levels in 1941 were higher than in 1940. The Blitz was a masterclass in how to kill tens of thousands of people without achieving a single one of your primary objectives.
Now, it's easy to look at the photos of smiling people in rubble and talk about the Blitz spirit. And while the courage was real, the unified, cheerful story was mostly a product of very effective government propaganda. The reality was much messier because humans are messy. While heroes were pulling neighbors from burning buildings, others were busy looting bombed-out shops. Crime rates, particularly for theft, went up significantly in many areas. Black markets thrived, selling goods that were officially rationed. There was social friction, with people from the bombed East End feeling that the wealthier West End was getting off lightly. And the psychological toll was immense. People suffered from exhaustion, anxiety, and trauma on a scale that wasn't fully understood at the time. The real story isn't one of cartoonish, unflinching bravery. It's a far more impressive story of flawed, frightened, and often grumpy people who endured something unimaginable and just kept going.
By May 1941, the nightly raids began to slow down and then largely stopped. This wasn't because Britain had won some decisive victory in the skies over London. It was because Germany had developed a new, even more ambitious, terrible idea. The German leadership, ever the strategic genius, decided it was the perfect time to invade the Soviet Union. This new venture, Operation Barbarossa, required a colossal amount of resources, including most of the Luftwaffe bombers that had been busy redecorating British cities. So the Blitz didn't really end with a bang, but with the quiet transfer of aircraft to airfields in Poland. For Britain, it was the end of the beginning. They had survived, not by crushing the enemy, but simply by outlasting their attention span. It was a victory through sheer, stubborn endurance. A reminder that sometimes the best strategy is to just refuse to lose until your opponent gets distracted by a bigger, colder, and ultimately more disastrous mistake. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!